Hello and welcome to the Friday, January 21st, 2022 edition of On Iowa Politics. Support provided by New Pioneer Food Co-op, celebrating 50 years as Eastern Iowa's source for locally and responsibly sourced groceries, with stores in Iowa City, Coralville, and Cedar Rapids, and online through Co-op Cart at newpi.coop. It's only January, but already the midterm campaign seems to have reached the silly season. The Republican Party of Iowa has raised a concern about Abby Finkenauer's language. In recent social media posts and releases, she's used damn and jackass. Fortunately, the GOP used asterisks rather than spell out that cuss word.
That's right, like newspapers.
Apparently, they didn't want to run afoul of their censors in the Iowa legislature. The concern seems to be a bit one-sided. While concerned about Finkenauer's use of damn and jackass, it doesn't have a problem with Representative Ashley Hinson using hell. Asked about her advocacy for the Army Corps of Engineers spending bipartisan infrastructure package dollars, which she voted against, Hinson said she wouldn't sit back and let those funds go to other states. Hell no, I'm going to make sure as much of it comes to Iowa as possible. When I asked the Iowa GOP if it would call out Hinson, a spokesman replied, quote, "These are hardly the same kind of comments." The hell you say.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm James Lynch of the Cedar Rapids Gazette. With me today are Tom Barton of the Quad City Times. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, James.
Amie Rivers of the Waterloo Cedar-Falls Courier. Good morning, Amie.
Good morning, James. R.I.P. Meatloaf.
Yes, we should observe a moment of silence. Very short. Erin Murphy, State House Bureau Chief for the Gazette. Good morning, Erin.
Good morning, James.
And Gazette Opinion Editor Todd Dorman. Good morning, Todd.
Good beepin' morning.
Asterisk.
Lots of asterisks today, I think.
Hashtags, stars, whatever.
Yeah.
This week on what Iowa podcast, Biden 1 year in, Reynolds rolls in cash, a river runs through the Hinson-Mathis contest. First up, the Biden presidency. A year into his presidency, Joe Biden did his first news conference in several months. Whether or not it was the reset his largely stalled agenda supporters hoped for, they called it a bravo performance, if only for its length, an hour and 51 minutes. That's longer than any press conference by either former President Barack Obama or former President Donald Trump. Biden hasn't lost his legs. "I'm still standing," he told reporters. Given the length, it seems there was something for everyone to praise or pick at. Todd, how would you grade Biden's presser?
Well, on a curve. At least he didn't spend, the first 20 minutes with a dog and pony show and then take 4 questions and turn tail out the door, as we've seen with some press conferences. I think people complained about the length, but some people that complained about the length were the same people that complained he didn't have press conferences. So I was a little confused about it looks like he can't win. I think he actually tried to provide an honest assessment of some of the problems that he's had, which, given the previous occupant, honesty is at a press conference is sort of nice. I mean, he didn't proclaim that he had accomplished more than any world leader in a year in the history of the world. He didn't say that he had the biggest bills and bill signing pen and all of that. And he did say some things that had to be cleaned up, and at least his folks tried to clean them up and not just kind of come on afterwards and double down on nonsense. So in that way, it was a break from the recent past. And I mean, anytime a president is willing to take almost 2 hours worth of questions from the media, as someone that's in that business, I wish that would happen a lot more often.
Sort of a ask the prime minister sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or an ask me anything session. Thoughts on his news conference? Did he help himself, or as Todd mentioned, just make cleanup work for his staff, clarifying things he said about Russia and Ukraine and other items or issues that got brought up during the press conference. Um, I guess one thing I'd be curious to hear from you guys about is his plan for the second year of the presidency. He says he's going to get out of this place, the White House, more often. He wants more academics and think tanks involved in the conversations, and he's going to be deeply involved in the off-year elections. I guess I'm curious: will any Democrat in a competitive district want the president campaigning with them?
I don't think so. I think that would probably be maybe not the greatest plan for Liz Mathis to undertake. I mean, the approval numbers being the way they are, the fact that Iowa voters didn't really like Biden, in his caucus appearance by a long shot. I don't know if he'd do more harm than good, but I don't necessarily think that it would get that enthusiasm that you're looking for. It would probably bring out the base, but that's not really what you're wanting to do, especially when you're a challenger.
Tom, Abby Finkenauer endorsed Joe Biden back in the caucus season. Will he return the favor in the Senate race?
Man, that's a good question. I think he would definitely be willing to if the Finkenauer campaign asked him to do that. And as you mentioned, Abby Finkenauer, has close personal connection and ties to President Biden, and supported him early on, still supports him, is a big advocate for the president and his policies. Again, though, to what Amie said, is that going to really help her in this race, though? Especially when she's running against a entrenched Republican incumbent who has had some sagging and declining approval numbers recently in the state, but still is fairly popular. Someone who supported the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and has worked across party aisles, and has worked to help advance one of Biden's key legislative priorities. So again, having Biden in Iowa, in a state that didn't really back him in the caucuses and didn't support him in the general election, does that help Abby turn out supporters and mobilize her base? Maybe, but that probably is going to do her more harm than good in the general election. It's only, I think in my mind, it's only going to embolden Republicans in this state, and just lead to more cries of "Let's go, Brandon."
Speaking of naughty words,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if a Biden appearance fits in with what Finkenauer is trying to do. I mean, she's come out in favor of term limits, which is an obviously clear shot at Senator Grassley, who's been in office for a really, really, really long time, and she's trying to project. I can't project, but she's trying to project some youthful, enthusiasm and energy. And in contrast, they would argue with the senators. So I don't think bringing someone like Biden in that's got also his own long tenure is going to maybe play into that. It'd be more likely to see maybe, some different Democrats with national profile coming in to work on that race, but probably not the president, I wouldn't think.
Finkenauer might have to sort of tone down her language because I think the strongest I've ever heard from Biden is malarkey. He doesn't use four-letter words.
Well, he did have the BFD thing with healthcare, so I think he's got a little salty language, so I think he understands.
Erin,
I mean, that's how they talk. That's how they talk in Scranton.
Yeah. Erin, the president talked about trying to get some of his Build Back Better, big chunks of it passed in standalone bills. Looking at the first year, his big accomplishment was the bipartisan infrastructure package, which had bipartisan support. Shouldn't this have been the approach from the beginning to try and take this in, find where you have support and do those things?
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of thought that, but it's clearly not the way that congressional Republicans go. I mean, and we've seen this in past legislation too. That it seems to be that they think it's and I don't know if I might have just said Republicans just now. I'm talking about all congressional representatives. We've seen this from both Republican and Democratic priorities, and they throw big packages together rather than, the voting rights is another one, bill that there's just so much in there, and some things that you could probably get a large majority of Americans to support, but then you've got other things in there that kind of more draws down political boundaries. So, I mean, I guess that's why I'm not a member of Congress. I've never understood that route of putting all the eggs in one basket rather than trying to, pick at things a little more narrowly. So you're asking the wrong person. I agree. I think that would have been the best approach from the start. And you can go back to any other number of bills in the past too, and I would have said the same thing.
So, what's the consensus here? Would you let Biden do another 2-hour press conference, or maybe do a press conference with subtitles by his communication staff?
Well, maybe do, an hour, more often. I don't know if we need 2 hours, but
I was just gonna say, like, yeah, if you do them a little more regularly, then the White House press corps won't be starving for something that could last 2 hours. So just kind of pop in every once in a while here, and then maybe half hour to an hour will be enough.
Oh, I don't think the press corps will run out of questions. I don't know.
no,
Yeah, that's true.
That's unlikely.
Yeah. Moving along here, the money campaign. Governor Kim Reynolds is crushing it, at least in fundraising for her reelection, which we expect she will announce sometime before June 7th. She told me yesterday that she's focused on her legislative agenda. There's always time for that other stuff later. So I guess ignore the campaign appearances, ignore those emails from the campaign until after the legislative session. But back to the numbers, Erin, how big or bad are the numbers for the gubernatorial candidates?
Whew. I don't know that I know the adjectives to fully describe what we saw when those reports filed on Wednesday. I mean, this is remarkable. Governor Reynolds did well, and that's not shocking or surprising. He raised almost $4 million in the year and has almost $5 million in her account. That doesn't bat an eye. But what's just staggering is the lack of Democratic fundraising in that race for anyone. So you look at Deidre DeGier, who is the highest profile candidate left in that Democratic primary. She raised $280,000, which is not a big number, and she spent most of it running her campaign. She finished the year with only $8,500 in her campaign account, which is just a just shockingly low number going into an election year. It's baffling. It gives the appearance to me that Democratic donors have raised the white flag on this race, that they're not putting their money at because they think that Kim Reynolds can't be beat, or whether they think the candidates that have decided to run aren't strong enough to take her on. I don't know. That's a question I'd like to explore in the future. But whatever the reason, clearly Democrats aren't putting their money in this race, and it's just unbelievable. I went back and looked from this same report 4 years ago. There was a 5-way primary. So first and foremost, even before we get to the dollars, there was 5 people running to face Kim Reynolds. 3 of them raised more than $1 million in that year. Now, one of them was Fred Hubble, who did a lot of self-funding, but you still had 2 other candidates who raised $1 million. Kathy Glosson or Andy McGuire raised around $600,000. And even John Norris raised around $300,000. So Deidre DeGier didn't raise as much as any of the 5 candidates in that primary 4 years ago. It's just incredible.
Todd, do Democrats have to decide pretty quickly whether they're going to mount a challenge against Reynolds, either by donating to DeShear or finding a candidate that can go out and raise multi-million dollars, or, as Erin suggested, raise the white flag and sit out the 2022 race?
Yeah, I mean, one Democrat I talked to used the word catastrophic to describe DeShear's fundraising position, and I don't think that that's wrong. Uh, you know, nothing's the only poll that counts is on election day, right? I
Thank you,
guess
Governor
that's
Branstad.
yeah, exactly. And so that's a ways off. But I think it's too late for another candidate to emerge, and I don't know who that candidate would be. You hear Chris Hall, but I don't see him making any definitive moves. And in fact, I think it was the condition of the state. He had a photo taken. He was sitting with DeGier in the House chamber. So that seemed to indicate to me that maybe he wasn't preparing to take her on in a primary. Could be wrong, but I think I think the only chances if Democrats decide to start doing some fundraising and feed this campaign, I don't. I guess I understand why they might give up and raise the white flag, but it's just baffling to me. I mean, this among Democrats, this our current governor is exceedingly unpopular, and that's to put it mildly. I mean, she's criticized daily by a lot of Democrats on a lot of different issues. I mean, she's less liked by Democrats than Terry Branstad was, which is hard to believe. And yet, they've got a candidate who, if you talk to Deidre DeZier and hear about what she wants to do, she's a pretty solid Democratic candidate with progressive ideas and should appeal to folks on the Democratic Party. And yet, those two things, anger at the current governor and a quality candidate, and no one's giving her any money. And so then there's all sorts of things that you start thinking about, why is this happening? So I think they're going to have to get behind DeGier if they want to have any chance of, and this isn't just about winning the governorship. I mean, if they don't challenge her, those millions of dollars are going to go to the party. They're going to go into legislative campaigns. They're going to go into congressional campaigns. I mean, this is going to wreck their chances up and down the ticket if you don't challenge a sitting governor that's raising this much money. So that's the decision they have to make. Are they just going to throw up the white flag on a lot of these races? I mean, I think it's not likely they're going to flip a legislative chamber or anything like that anyway. But I mean, how bad do they want this to get? And the worse it gets, the tougher it's going to be next time to raise money. So I think they really need to make some hard choices because this party is a lot deeper in the wilderness than maybe we might have even imagined. And if they take another walloping this year, I don't know where they go from here.
Yeah, it would be pretty staggering if they didn't mount a challenge in a gubernatorial race. And Amie, as Todd was saying, you know, Reynolds' millions could flow to other candidates if she doesn't think she needs them for her own race. How much impact does that have on those down ballot races, whether it's for attorney general or state legislative races? Is this? I mean, could this, in a perverse way, be good news for legislative candidates and candidates like Liz Mathis and Christina Bohannon down in Southeast Iowa, um, Democrats who are running against Republican incumbents?
I mean, they're going to have to tell themselves that if the Democrats aren't fielding a candidate that they're funding. Todd's prediction is pretty bleak, but I think he's spot on. If the Democrats really aren't getting behind DeGier for any number of reasons, then that's really going to be bad. I mean, you really need somebody in an election that's like the head of the party. So if you've got the city election is the mayor on the ballot, then everybody else will come with him. If it's a presidential election, you've got to have somebody for president that's very exciting. And if you don't, you're going to lose a lot of those voters, especially young voters, sometimes voters, whatever. You need somebody like a DeGier to really make the campaign exciting. So far, she hasn't made the campaign exciting. She hasn't been able to get those donors, and it could be for any number of reasons. Could this be because she's a Black woman, right? Things we're not saying, kind of thing. Roz Smith indicated that he wasn't getting any sort of looks from donors. He wasn't getting help from the state party. So is this sort of a state party internal turmoil happening? I think that's a really interesting thing to be exploring this year. But I think, yeah, they definitely need to get behind DeGier, because if they don't, everybody's going to suffer. People aren't going to turn out to just vote for their, senator, basically, unless all of a sudden, Liz Mathis really makes it a game too. But at this point, there's got to be a governor candidate at the top of that ticket.
What I find really interesting is that, and I think we've talked about this before, that when you talk to Republicans, even people close to the governor's campaign, they say that they expected the race to be as close or closer than 2018, when she won by 2.5 points over Fred Hubble. So they were not expecting a slam dunk this year. And I think certainly we all thought this race was going to be competitive, and yet we're just seeing a massive lack of interest on the part of Democratic donors to be a part of this fight. So, it just sort of baffling why they would give up at this point. Because, I mean, as Todd was saying, DeGier is a very solid Democrat with some progressive ideas. That seems like she would be very appealing, and certainly, Democrats are not going to go out and vote for Kim Reynolds with or without a candidate on their ticket.
Maybe these Democratic donors are just looking forward to their flat tax and their retirement income being untaxed, and they've just decided to sort of lay low and, yeah, we're progressives, but hey, we like the money.
Pocketbook issues. Tom, we saw that Senator Robbie Smith outraised Treasurer Mike Fitzgerald 8-1. And not to read too much into this, but do longtime Democratic office holders like Fitzgerald and Attorney General Tom Miller, the longest serving Attorney General in U.S. history, do they have to worry that they're not going to be able to compete if Republicans are out there raising money like this, and if they don't have that figurehead at the top of the ticket that Amie was talking about to rally Democrats to go to the polls?
So the fundraising disparity definitely puts Democrats in a difficult place as they move into the heat of an election year. Does that mean that they face losses? I think it's too early to say, but you're right. Without that figurehead at the top of the ticket, energizing Democrats and donors, without a strong candidate running for governor, it does certainly make it hard for, as you mentioned, those down ballot candidates. But I think especially for those office holders, running for offices like Attorney General and State Treasurer, offices that don't get a lot of high visibility among Iowans and voters. They're offices, positions that Iowans don't think about for the most part. Offices where, you rely on that energy and the momentum at the top of the ticket to generate, interest for the campaign. So that's going to be incredibly difficult. It's going to be an uphill battle. And Republicans will say that the disparity is evidence that the political momentum is largely on the side of the GOP as they continue to expand the battlefield of competitive races. But as you mentioned, both Miller and Fitzgerald have quite a bit of staying power and popularity in the state. They're both the nation's longest serving office holders for their respective office. And so I guess you can raise the question of, well, is it just early on in the race and they haven't thought about fundraising and they've got, extensive donor network or wealthy donors, including maybe potential national donors that, they can tap here as we, get later on into the campaign cycle. I don't know. I just think it's too early to tell, but it's definitely worrisome. I think it's definitely concerning for both.
Yeah, Miller and Fitzgerald haven't had real strong challengers in
Challengers
recent
in the
elections.
past.
So I think I saw that Smith raised more money than Fitzgerald had raised in 10 years, which I think speaks to the sort of the competition that he's faced. But no disrespect to either Miller or Fitzgerald, but I don't know that people go to the polls to vote for either one of them. I think they go to vote for governor or senator or their
Right.
legislator or something, and those statewide offices are sort of oh yeah. In other news, Erin, we also saw fundraising numbers from legislative leaders, and both Senator Jack Whitver and House Speaker Pat Grassley pulled in some fairly impressive numbers, and much larger numbers than their Democratic counterparts. How significant are these differences?
Yeah, they weren't 13 times bigger like the governor's race numbers. So it wasn't that bad. That's the good news for Democrats. But Jack Whitver raised more than $500,000, and as we know, he's planning a move into a newer, safer district. So he won't have to spend very much of that on himself too. So it's kind of a double bonus there. If he had stayed, he would have had a much more competitive race, as that Ankeny district gets a little more kind of evenly divided politically. So he would have had to put some resources into his own race. He'll have to do much less of that now, so he can use the vast majority of that $500,000 haul to help out his fellow Senate Republicans cling to their 30 to 18 or was 32 to 18 majority. And then in the House, Pat Grassley raised almost 400,000, and Jennifer Converse just a little more than 100,000. So again, a big advantage there as well. Now the state parties play into this too, and the Iowa Democratic Party had a decent year, actually outraised the Republicans, so they'll be able to help out there. Although their interests are a little more split. They'll be trying to help out races at all levels. So I mean, it wasn't as bad as what we saw in the governor's field, but they've got some ground to cover up at that legislative level too. But as one Democratic staffer told me from the State House, it's okay because they're scrappy.
Scrappy.
So,
okay, well, that's
There you
worked out
go.
in the past. Scrappy Democrats.
8,000 can
Wait.
buy a lot of Facebook ads these days. So
Wait,
Yeah.
they're the worst character on Scooby Doo? Is that what they're saying? Or is that something different?
oh man,
Let me at him.
All right. Well, speaking of let me at 'em, that was what Democrats were saying this week when First District Representative Ashley Hinson announced she had worked with Senator Chuck Grassley and Illinois Democratic Representative Sherry Bustos to get the Army Corps of Engineers to prioritize $829 million in improvements to the Mississippi River locks and dams. Some of these facilities are 80 or more years old. So, Tom, it seems like this would be a really big deal. Why are Democrats so upset with the announcement?
So while Hinson worked with a bipartisan group of lawmakers to advocate for the money, the Republican freshman legislator not only voted against the infrastructure bill that made the funding possible for the lock and dam projects, for which she touted and seemingly took credit for this week on social media, but she also slammed it as Washington gamesmanship when it passed. In a November news release, Hinson said that, quote, "Too often in Washington, the potential for important bipartisan policy is torpedoed by partisan politics. The need to make meaningful investment in our nation's real infrastructure, roads and bridges, locks and dams and broadbands, was sacrificed to advance a partisan socialist spending spree." And so Democrats have called out Hinson, who's up for re-election in November, for her attempt to take credit for the much-needed investment and for misleading Iowans. Democrat Liz Mathis, who's running against Hinson, said that her social media post calling the announced funding, quote, game-changing, end quote, for Iowa's agricultural industry and Mississippi River communities. Quote is yet another example of Ashley Hinson claiming that she supports investments that benefit Iowans, but voting along party lines against their best interests in Washington.
Someone explained this to me with this analogy. They said this is like you and your friends going out for pizza, and you want pepperoni, but your three friends decide they want sausage. But since you've paid for the pizza, you're still going to eat your share of the pizza. And I don't know if the pizza analogy flies or not, but Todd,
I don't know. I don't get it. Did they get sausage or did they get pepperoni?
do half and half or whatever,
Okay.
quarters, right. Yeah. But
was it a breakfast pizza?
Casey's, correct.
Todd, are the statements by Hinson and her Democratic detractors what Joe Biden might call hyperbole on the hypocrisy river?
Well, I tell you, it wasn't just, for one thing, it wasn't just that Hinson voted against the bill. It was the sort of the disingenuous argument she made at the time for not supporting it, because a lot of Republicans tried to latch the infrastructure bill to the Build Back Better bill and say the whole thing was a socialist spending spree. But as we now know, Build Back Better didn't pass, and the money's being handed out from the infrastructure bill. And so that whole argument that this was a big, scam didn't hold water. And now she's, trying to take credit for these sort of extra processes. But the bottom line is she made a political calculation, voted against the bill. She had to know that there was going to be consequences for that. And we saw that those were the consequences that kind of came home to roost this week. And I mean, it, there's the larger segment of the Republicans in Congress have decided that, approving anything like this, whether that be broken up into smaller bills or big bills or whatever, the most important thing is to not let the president have a victory. So that's what they're doing. And they also saw what happened to the 13 House Republicans that voted for the infrastructure bill. They had to take a Trumpian backlash from the former president, and I think one of them even got some death threats. So yeah, it's we're not under normal circumstances where you look at a bill and say, oh, this is good for my district. Republicans have to make these calculations. Okay, am I going to upset the base? Am I going to, how is this going to play out? And she's trying to have it both ways, but in the end, you just sort of can't.
Well, if you can fool the voters, you can.
Yeah, if you can fool your voters, I suppose that's true. But
many politicians have been successful at doing that.
Yeah, it's not new. This was a particularly egregious example, but yeah, it's not new.
And when it happens again, we'll talk about it on a future edition of On Iowa Politics. If you enjoy the podcast, tell a friend and subscribe to us wherever you find your podcast. Send fan mail to podcast@thegazette.com. Don't forget the work of everyone you heard today can be found on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Waterloo Cedar-Falls Courier, Sioux City Journal, Mason City Globe Gazette, Muscatine Journal, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and Cedar Rapids Gazette. The Olympics will take us out. If you know an Iowa band or musician who should be on our show, send us a sound file and subscribe to On Iowa Politics. For Erin, Amie, Todd, Tom, and our producer, Stephen, I'm James Lynch. Thanks for listening. Be well.